Chapter 1. The funeral had not even reached the second hymn when the disruption began. St. Botolph's, Flaxborough's oldest and draftiest church, was packed to the rafters, partly out of respect, partly out of curiosity. The late Reverend Charles Stillingfleet had presided over the town's spiritual dramas for nearly 4 decades and, as was often remarked with a wink, some of its secular ones too. The town had never quite known whether to revere him or restrain him, but now he was gone, and the congregation had gathered, as they always did, to see who cried, who didn't, and who would inherit the silver communion plate. The air was incense thick, organ music trailing solemnly into the side aisles. It was during "Abide with Me" that the first gasp sounded. A woman in a pale green hat, the vicar's niece, Miss Rowena Stillingfleet, rose abruptly from her pew, pushed past 2 elderly mourners, and marched down the central aisle, her heels sharp on the stone. She halted at the baptismal font. There, resting incongruously in the hollow basin, was a box. Not the ceremonial urn arranged at the altar. No, this was something else. A cardboard archive container, the sort used in town hall storage rooms. It bore a label in faded ink, St. Botolph's Ledger, restricted/private addendum. Rowena reached out to touch it, then drew back. Her mouth moved in some whispered horror. And then she turned, face pale, and announced to the stunned church, his will was tampered with. Gasps, then a murmur. In the back row, a parish councillor muttered, "Oh, not again." In the choir stalls, one of the sopranos fainted with perfect comedic timing. From the nave came a sharp voice. Miss Elspeth Beacon, town solicitor emerita. "That is an extremely serious accusation, Miss Stillingfleet." Rowena nodded once, trembling. "The font. He left something hidden in the font." The organist stopped playing. A pigeon in the rafters made a startled noise as if protesting the suspension of order. Then the whisper chain began, spreading through pews like a virus. Tampered. An addendum? I told you he was hiding something. She always hated the new curate. Didn't he leave a sealed envelope at the vestry? As the congregation slowly filtered out into the damp spring morning, still buzzing with improvised theories, Inspector Purbright stood quietly near the side door. He had attended not out of duty, but curiosity. The late Reverend had once assisted the constabulary in the matter of the Rathbone forgeries, a fact that, naturally, the church newsletter never printed. Purbright had learned to respect Stillingfleet's contradictions. Devout but sly, kind but calculating. Sergeant Love appeared at his shoulder, clutching a leaflet that now bore sermon notes and fresh gossip. "Sir, if someone tampered with the will—" "It's already too late," Purbright said. Love blinked. "How do you mean?" "Because whatever's in that box," Purbright murmured, "was meant to be found now, not when the will was read, not when the estate was divided, but today, in front of the whole town." They made their way back inside. The church had largely emptied, save for Miss Stillingfleet, Elspeth Beacon, and 2 acolytes who had taken up defensive positions near the font. The box remained untouched. Beacon gestured to it sharply. "I advise against opening it until we've confirmed its relevance." Rowena's voice trembled with urgency. "I know my uncle's handwriting. He told me once, if anything happened to him unexpectedly, to look to the place of rebirth. This is it." The font Purbright stepped forward. "May I?" Beacon opened her mouth to object, then thought better of it. Rowena gave a small nod. Purbright reached in and lifted the lid. Inside, 3 documents neatly wrapped in tissue paper and a small velvet pouch. He examined the first page. It was not a will, nor a codicil. It was a statement. "To whom it may concern, I, Charles Edward Stillingfleet, Vicar of this parish, hereby attest that the event of July 4th, 2001 in the vestry room was neither an accident nor an oversight. I possess documentation which will clarify the matter. If this is found after my death, I implore the reader to consult the pouch attached." Love leaned in. "What happened in 2001? Purbright didn't reply. He opened the pouch. Inside, a key. Small, brass. Labelled, "Vestry drawer." Lower. Miss Beacon's expression had turned grim. "That drawer has been locked since before the new curate arrived." Purbright looked at Rowena. "Has anyone else had access?" She shook her head. "Only him, and the sexton. But Mr. Ellerby left years ago." Purbright looked again at the statement, noting the subtle tremble in the signature, as though written in secrecy or strain. "This is no afterthought," he said softly. "It's an indictment." Outside, the bells rang again, not for morning, but for the next service in 20 minutes. But inside, silence lingered, thick and expectant. Love looked around. "Sir, you think this is about that old church fund scandal, the one no one would talk about?" Purbright returned the statement to its envelope. "I think the vicar left us a sermon no one ever heard. And someone in this town will do everything they can to keep it from being preached. More answers in Chapter 2. But first, what's your theory? What secret lies in the vestry drawer? Why did the vicar wait until death to speak? And who in the parish has the most to lose if his legacy is exposed? Comment below. The vestry smelled of oiled wood and something older, something dry and secretive, like old sermons never spoken aloud. Dust haloed in the narrow shafts of light that cut through the leaded windows, illuminating the brass drawer handles on the built-in cabinet. Beneath the old hymnals, Inspector Purbright inserted the key. It turned smoothly, almost disappointingly so, as if no one had ever tried to lock it away with any great conviction. The drawer slid open without a creak. Love held his breath. Inside was a flat parcel, tied with green ribbon, aged but deliberate. Beneath it, a sheaf of older parish rosters, ink-faded, edges browned. Purbright ignored those for now. He lifted the parcel and untied the ribbon with care. The folds revealed 3 pages of neatly typed confession, followed by what appeared to be 2 copies of a bank ledger, one bearing the official diocesan seal, the other conspicuously lacking it. Purbright read in silence. Love shifted. "Sir," Purbright handed him the first page. "Start with the first paragraph." Aloud. Love cleared his throat. "In the summer of 2001, a sum of £6,000 was received in trust from the estate of Mrs. Eunice Brangwyn to be allocated for the restoration of the south transept stained glass. The donation, which was marked by her solicitor as final and non-renewable, was deposited in the Flaxborough Mutual and attested in the parish books. However, by autumn, the account had been emptied and closed." Love blinked. "I thought the transept was repaired in 2002. Purbright nodded. "It was, but paid for, according to the second ledger, by a diocesan matching fund, not the Brangwyn bequest." Love's brow furrowed. So the original donation was siphoned or redirected, illegally, if done without proper consent. Purbright lifted the next page. He names no accomplice, but he admits knowledge of the removal and regret over his silence. Says he was pressured, though he leaves the source vague. A senior figure with means and a motive. Love frowned. "Why write it all now?" "He didn't intend to," said Purbright, folding the page carefully. "Look here, the date is 4 years old. This was written in 2021. Love looked at him. So why didn't he come forward then?" Purbright studied the third sheet. "Because someone convinced him not to, or frightened him out of it." From behind them came a quiet knock. Elspeth Beacon stood in the doorway, lips pursed like an unopened envelope. "I take it you found something?" Purbright gestured gently. "We're in the early stages." She stepped inside, her shoes silent on the old flagstones. The niece is understandably upset. She's taken a seat in the rectory with a strong cup of something unsuitable for church grounds. She mentioned the vicar made vague references in recent weeks, Purbright said. Concerns over the church's reputation. Any talk of personal threats? Beacon lifted an eyebrow. Charles had many enemies, Inspector. Mostly within his own flock. But no, nothing direct. There was tension about his handling of the curate's appointment last year, and 1 or 2 letters of protest about the use of parish funds for the community mural. Love asked, the one in the schoolyard? Yes, featuring Noah with a distinctly political rainbow. Purbright folded the documents and slipped them into an evidence envelope. I'd like to see the diocesan records for the Brangwyn Fund. Originals, not transcripts. I'll arrange it, Beacon replied. But it won't be quick. The diocese runs on tea and amateur dramatics. Outside, the bells had long fallen silent. The wind stirred against the stained glass, casting slow-moving colors over the stone floor like light creeping across stained memory. Later that afternoon, Purbright and Love returned to the station. The evidence was logged and locked. Miss Stillingfleet, now steadier, provided a more coherent account. Her uncle had, in recent months, been paranoid about legacies, obsessed with ensuring certain truths were not buried with him. She had assumed it was spiritual. In his office, Purbright sat for a long while, rereading the vicar's words. The lack of a named accomplice was both telling and deliberate. Whoever had pressed the vicar into silence had wielded something powerful. Fear, perhaps, or leverage. And if the envelope in the font was truly planted with the niece in mind, the timing had been careful, theatrical. Someone wanted this confession exposed, but only once the vicar could no longer clarify it. Love tapped on the frame of the door. Sir, you should see this. In the squad room, an officer laid out the morning's mail. Among it, a second envelope. Thick, pale blue. Addressed not to the police, but to the Flaxborough Clarion. Purbright opened it with a scalpel. Inside, a single sheet of notepaper and a clipping from the parish council meeting minutes, dated precisely to July 2001. The note read, "The stain was never glass, it was trust. Ask who signed off the replacement fund and who quietly resigned 2 weeks later." Love let out a low whistle. Someone's staging a reckoning. Purbright stared at the clipping. The signature listed at the bottom of the 2001 entry, M.W. Frayne, council chair. Love said, "Frayne. He's back in town, isn't he? Retired from Whitstable. Bought that place near the river." Purbright nodded slowly, and presumably assumed that the past would stay buried. Love watched him. "Do you think the vicar mailed this before he died?" "I think," Purbright said. "Someone wants to be certain that Frayne doesn't preside over anything else." He tucked the letter into his coat. "We pay him a visit, quietly. And while we do, check who else was on that 2001 council. I want names, especially any who now sit in positions to direct parish funding or hush matters at the diocese." Love scribbled a note. "And if Frayne's not the only one who knew, then we're not dealing with a cover-up," Purbright said. "We're dealing with an arrangement." The station clock struck the hour, and across town, in a quiet cottage lined with river reeds, someone pulled a curtain back and watched the shadows grow longer on the path, wondering just how long the silence would hold. More answers in Chapter 3. But first, what's your theory? Was Frayne the one who silenced the vicar, or is someone else using the past as leverage? Who stood to gain from a vanishing fund, and what else was buried with it? Comment below. The path to Maurice Frayne's cottage wound along the river bank, flanked by reeds that bowed under the weight of yesterday's rain. The air smelled faintly of mud and wood smoke, the sort of damp familiarity that made Flaxborough's quieter corners feel timeless. But to Inspector Purbright, each step carried the weight of years not forgotten, but deliberately shelved. The 2001 council minutes had put Frayn's name firmly in the margin of the vicar's legacy, and now, like a reluctant witness dragged back to the stage, Frayn would need to answer. Sergeant Love followed at his shoulder, his notebook already half filled with parish names. "So far, I've got 5 councillors from that year who are still about town," he murmured. Frayn, of course. Mrs. Bletchley, who runs the haberdashery. Mr. Collier, retired, still lives above the bakery. And there's the twins, Ernest and Edwin Hargreaves. They've gone respectable, farming lettuces. All signed those minutes. Purbright gave a soft hum. Names with longevity, which means names with something to lose if old scandals rise. Frayn's cottage came into view, a squat structure with a lichen-clad roof and shutters that seemed more decorative than functional. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, but the curtains at the front window were drawn. A small brass plaque by the gate read, "M.W. Frayn, Justice of the Peace, retired." The kind of reminder no one had asked for, but he still wished to provide. Purbright rapped firmly at the door. It opened a fraction after a pause long enough to suggest hesitation. Frayn himself appeared, older now, stooped but still imposing in manner. His hair was white, combed neatly back, his mouth set in that half-smile of men who believe authority is eternal. "Inspector Purbright," he said, voice level, "and Sergeant Love. To what do I owe this unexpected intrusion?" Purbright inclined his head politely. "We'd like a word, Mr. Frayn. It concerns Reverend Stillingfleet." A flicker passed across Frayn's eyes, hardly more than a twitch, but enough. "The man is dead, Inspector. I paid my respects at the funeral. That ought to suffice." "Perhaps," Purbright replied. "But his words have outlived him." Frayn stepped aside reluctantly. The interior of the cottage was meticulously kept, bookshelves lined with parish histories, a clock ticking with irritating precision, the faint smell of polish everywhere. He gestured stiffly toward 2 chairs. Purbright remained standing. "Do you recall the Brangwyn donation? July 2001, a sum of £6,000. Frayn blinked once. Vaguely. Mrs. Brangwyn was charitable, if a trifle ostentatious. The money was designated for stained glass repairs, but by autumn the account was closed. The vicar left documents suggesting the funds were diverted. You chaired that meeting." Frayn's smile tightened. "Funds are often reallocated. Emergencies arise. One cannot memorialize every pound and penny without suffocating in bureaucracy." Love leaned forward. "So you did reallocate it?" "I said funds are often reallocated," Frayn corrected. "I don't recall specifics. 2 decades past, Sergeant. Surely your time is better spent on present crimes?" Purbright placed the clipping of the minutes on the small table between them. "This bears your signature." Frayn looked at it, then back at Purbright. "And what of it?" "Reverend Stillingfleet believed the event was no accident," Purbright said softly. He left a statement. For the first time, the mask slipped. Frayn's voice grew sharper. He was a man of many statements. Too many, perhaps. "Yet this one was kept hidden until his death," Purbright said. "Why would that be, Mr. Frayn?" The silence stretched. Frayn shifted in his chair, then stood abruptly and crossed to the window. He pulled back the curtain just enough to look out at the river, though his voice remained level. "You think corruption exotic, Inspector, as though it was some foreign disease. But in a town like this, it is merely accommodation. Mrs. Brangwyn's bequest was never touched by thieves. It was redirected to cover a deficit that, if revealed, would have cost Flaxborough its reputation and half its parish council." "And the vicar?" Purbright asked. Frayn let the curtain fall. He agreed, reluctantly, and he lived with the weight of it for the rest of his life. Love stared. So he was in on it? Not in, Frayne said, but near. Close enough to see that silence was preferable. He may have regretted it. Clergy often do when conscience and community collide. Purbright studied him. Then why the locked drawer? Why the confession? Frayne's eyes were cold. Because men like Stillingfleet can't resist leaving riddles for posterity. Perhaps he wanted a little scandal to follow him to the grave. Or perhaps he feared what might be uncovered if he did not leave a diversion. Diversion from what? Frayne smiled faintly. That, Inspector, is for you to discover. They left soon after, Frayne refusing further answers. Outside, the air was sharp, carrying the smell of river reeds. Love exhaled, notebook under his arm. He as good as admitted it, Love muttered. They buried the Brangwyn fund, with his signature at the bottom. Purbright nodded, though his gaze remained thoughtful. Yes, but admissions are slippery. He gave us a truth, but not the whole of it. Love frowned. Then what's missing? Purbright looked back at the cottage, where the curtain now hung still. A name. He spoke of a deficit, a hole big enough to swallow £6,000, but not who dug it. That evening, back at the station, a new envelope awaited them. This one bore no stamp. It had been hand-delivered, slipped under the door. Inside was a single page torn from a hymnal. Across the verses was scrawled in thick black ink, "Look not to the treasurer. Look to the choir." Love muttered, "The choir. What have they to do with it?" Purbright's face remained unreadable. Every performance needs music, Sergeant, and sometimes the singers carry the secret the conductor cannot voice. More answers in Chapter 4. But first, what's your theory? Was Frayne confessing or concealing? Why point suspicion to the choir? And who benefits from letting the vicar's legacy ignite scandal now? Comment below. Sunday morning rehearsals at St. Botolph's were seldom dramatic affairs. The choir gathered in coats and scarves, half awake, their voices warming slowly as they fumbled through the hymns. Yet on this particular morning, the air inside the vestry was sharp with unease. Rumours had outpaced the organ music, and whispers about the late vicar's hidden drawer seemed to echo louder than the scales being sung. Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love stood quietly at the back, listening. From the outside, it was a collection of ordinary parishioners. Mrs. Gaffney, soprano, who ran the newsagents and could spot misdelivered post within seconds. Mr. Beecham, baritone, retired schoolmaster, who sang as though still lecturing. A scattering of younger voices, students from the town grammar, nervously eyeing the adults for tempo cues. And at the center of it all, directing with brisk precision, was the choir master, Lionel Cribb, a man whose bow tie seemed permanently fastened to his throat, and whose reputation for discipline had outlived 3 vicars. As the rehearsal wound down, Cribb turned to glare at Purbright. "Inspector, if you've come to turn our choir into a scandal sheet, I must insist you do it after practice. The sopranos have enough trouble finding their notes without gossip flattening them further." Purbright inclined his head mildly. "Quite so, though one wonders whether all the notes in this parish are still in their rightful place." Cribb's eyes flickered. Defensiveness, perhaps, or irritation at being outperformed in dry wit. Love opened his notebook. "We've had a message, an anonymous one, said not to look to the treasurer, but to the choir." This caused an immediate ripple. Mrs. Gaffney gasped. Mr. Beecham muttered something about slander. One of the grammar boys snickered nervously. Cribb folded his arms. "Anonymous notes are cowardly, Inspector. Choirs, unlike politicians, thrive on harmony. You'll find no theft here." "Perhaps not theft," Purbright said softly. "But pressure, influence. Someone might have used choir rehearsals as cover." meetings disguised as practice, envelopes passed with hymnals. Cribb bristled. Preposterous. Then you won't object, Purbright continued, if we ask about the Brangwyn bequest. July 2001. Several choir members were listed as witnesses on the council's ceremonial handover, including you, Mr. Cribb. The choir master stiffened. I recall the day. Mrs. Brangwyn made quite the show of it. A cheque, if memory serves, was presented at the Harvest Festival. £6,000, yes. But what business is that of mine? It was presented in front of the choir, Purbright said. You sang the Gloria. Did you notice what became of the cheque? Cribb hesitated. The room was still. Even Mrs. Gaffney leaned forward. It was taken, Cribb said finally, by Councillor Frayne, folded into a parish file. I assumed it was deposited, as intended. I didn't ask further. Love scribbled notes furiously. Did anyone else see this? A young alto, barely in her 20s, spoke up shyly. I did. I was head girl at the grammar school then. I handed round the service leaflets. Mr. Frayne slipped the cheque inside one of them before leaving all eyes turned to her. Purbright gave a small nod. And did you tell anyone at the time? The girl looked down. My father was on the council. He said not to meddle. A sharp intake of breath followed. The parish's harmony was suddenly in discord. Cribb straightened his bow tie as though reasserting control. There you have it, Inspector. A memory, but hardly proof, and dredging up old funds will not bring the vicar back. Perhaps not, Purbright replied, but it may show us why he left a key instead of a sermon. The rehearsal broke up with a tension that hummed louder than the organ. Choir members left in twos and threes, whispering about cheques and scandals, looking nervously at Purbright as though he might summon them next. Back at the station, the evidence pile grew. 2 ledgers, 1 confession, 1 anonymous hymn page note. And now, testimony pointing directly to Frayne. Yet something still failed to settle in Purbright's mind. Love returned from the registry office that afternoon with a file. Sir, I've checked. The cheque was never officially recorded in the parish account. Not in 2001, not after. But something else happened that autumn. Lionel Cribb's mortgage was suddenly paid off, 3 years early. Amount, £6,000. Purbright's eyes narrowed. And yet he insists on harmony. Think he took it? Love asked. Not took, Purbright murmured. Received. As thanks or as silence? Love frowned. Then why the anonymous note pointing to the choir? Purbright closed the file, slowly. Because someone wants the choir master to sing, whether in confession or in guilt, we shall hear soon enough. That evening, as dusk turned Flaxborough's rooftops into sharp silhouettes, a constable rushed into the inspector's office with news. Sir Lionel Cribb has collapsed. During Evensong rehearsal, they found him in the vestry, clutching a hymn book. Inside it, another envelope. Purbright rose without a word. When they arrived at St. Botolph's, the choir had already dispersed in frightened whispers. Cribb's body lay on a pew, eyes closed, face strangely peaceful. The hymn book still rested beside him, its pages marked not with psalms, but with a folded slip of paper. Purbright opened it carefully. The same typewritten hand. 3 have carried silence. 1 has broken. 2 remain. Love's throat tightened. Sir, this isn't just about the money anymore. Purbright's gaze moved slowly across the shadowed nave. It's about legacy. And the vicar wasn't the only one leaving messages. The organ pipes loomed overhead, silent as though waiting for the next note in a hymn too dark for any choir to finish. More answers in Chapter 5. But first, what's your theory? Did Lionel Cribb take the Brangwyn money, or was he silenced to look guilty? Who is writing these cryptic messages, and how many names remain hidden in the vicar's legacy? Comment below. The vestry was quiet once the body had been taken away. though the scent of polish and wax still clung to the benches where Lionel Cribb had slumped in death. Purbright stood where the choirmaster had fallen, looking down at the hymn book that had been his last possession. He turned it slowly in his hands. Nothing beyond the slip of paper, no scrawled name or hidden check, only the message, "3 have carried silence, 1 has broken, 2 remain." Love hovered uneasily at his side. "Sir, it could have been a heart attack. He wasn't a young man." Purbright didn't answer straight away. He placed the hymn book on the vestry table, aligning it neatly with the edge. Or it could have been theatre. A curtain drop at the perfect moment. The church warden, Mrs. Digby, appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands in a pair of black gloves. "Inspector, it's dreadful. Just dreadful." Poor Lionel. But if I may say so, he hadn't been himself these past weeks. Tense, distracted. He told me just last Thursday that he feared something was coming, that the music was about to change. Purbright inclined his head politely. "And did he say what tune was playing?" "No," she whispered, "only that he wished he'd kept quieter years ago." By the time Purbright and Love returned to the station, whispers of murder had already reached the market square. The word poison was muttered in the greengrocer's and retribution in the pub. In Flaxborough, silence never lasted longer than an afternoon. On his desk awaited another delivery, this time a brown envelope with no writing on the front. Inside were several sheets of music paper, ordinary at first glance, until Love noticed that the notes spelt words across the staves. He read them aloud, voice low. He sang for coin, not faith. Purbright's face remained calm, and now he's silent. The sheet music was unsigned, though its methodical neatness betrayed careful preparation. It was not the vicar's typewriter hand. Someone else was orchestrating these accusations. That evening, Purbright invited Clarissa Harbottle to the station. She arrived in her broad-brimmed hat, looking affronted before she had even been seated. "Inspector, if you're intending to drag the choir's grief through the mud, I must warn you that I shall complain to the diocesan board." Purbright offered her a chair and, without preamble, laid the mortgage records on the table. £6,000 cleared in 2001. Lionel Cribb's home. The same year the Brangwen bequest vanished. You sat on the Council Finance subcommittee at the time. Her painted eyebrows lifted in indignation. "I fail to see how that concerns me." "Because," Purbright said softly, "the subcommittee approved a reallocation no one ever recorded. A deficit quietly patched, as Mr. Frayne called it, and Cribb, it appears, was rewarded for his harmony." Harbottle leaned forward sharply. "If Lionel took money, that was his affair. He never confided in me, and I certainly never profited. The man was desperate. He'd overreached himself on that mortgage. Everyone knew it." Love asked, "Then why protect him? Why let the choir shoulder suspicion for 20 years? Her lips pursed. "Because scandal corrodes faster than time, Sergeant. Better one man bear whispers than a parish lose faith altogether." When she had gone, Love exhaled heavily. "So she's throwing him under the bus." "Not quite," Purbright said. "She's placing him in front of it after it has already passed. That's not protection, it's opportunism." 2 hours later, a constable hurried in with news. "Sir, there's a man at the desk. Wants to confess." Purbright and Love exchanged glances. In the interview room sat Mr. Beecham, the retired schoolmaster baritone. His hat was clutched in his lap, his knuckles white. "I took the Brangwen money," he said immediately. "All of it. I used it to cover my son's debts. Gambling. Lionel knew, and he let me. He even helped with the paperwork. But it was me. All me. I'm ready to face the consequences." Purbright studied him in silence for a long moment. Love finally asked, "Do you have any proof, sir? Bank records? Withdrawals?" Beecham shook his head. Number I paid it back, bit by bit, through anonymous donations to the parish. That's why you won't find it. Love whispered to Purbright. Could that be true? Purbright's eyes narrowed. It could be convenient. He leaned forward. Mr. Beecham, why now? Why confess after 20 years? The man swallowed. Because Lionel's dead, and I can't bear the whispers. I don't want to be accused behind my back. Better to say it myself. Purbright's voice was quiet. Or better to say what someone has urged you to. Beecham's eyes flickered. He looked down at his hands. I found a note in my hymn book. It said if I confessed, I would save others from worse. He reached into his pocket and handed over the slip. Same typewritten style. Confess, and the music ends. When Beecham was released on caution pending inquiry, Love shook his head. Sir, it feels too easy. A false trail? Purbright folded the slip into his coat. False confession, false absolution. Someone is composing this very carefully. They are conducting guilt like parts in a choir. Cribb was silenced. Beecham is singing on command. That leaves 2 voices still to be heard. Love asked, and if they refuse to sing? Purbright looked back at the empty interview room, where the old schoolmaster's hat still sat forgotten on the table. Then, he said softly, the conductor will take their place. More answers in Chapter 6. But first, what's your theory? Was Beecham truly guilty, or manipulated into confessing? Who is directing these staged revelations, and which 2 voices remain unheard? Comment below. By midweek, Flaxborough was ablaze with speculation. The Clarion's headline, Choir Master Dies in Vestry, Legacy Fund in Doubt, had ensured that every tea-table conversation revolved around Lionel Cribb's mysterious collapse and the whispers of long-hidden mismanagement. Shopkeepers spoke of nothing else, and by Wednesday, the butcher's boy had taken to asking customers whether they were one of the 3 before wrapping their sausages. Purbright let the talk wash over him. Gossip was often the truest barometer of how far guilt had seeped into a town. But what concerned him more were the silences, the names not spoken. In all the murmurings, no one mentioned Beecham's so-called confession, save for Beecham himself, who had spent the last 2 days alternating between declaring his guilt and insisting that he had been manipulated. Love found him at his desk one evening, staring at the slip of paper Beecham had handed over. Confess, and the music ends, the typewritten words declared. It's clever, sir. Whoever is behind this. They're not just pushing people. They're playing them. Purbright nodded. And like any conductor, they decide when to bring each voice in. Cribb's silence, Beecham's contrition, and 2 more to go. The second set piece came unexpectedly. Friday evening saw the annual pageant of St. Botolph, a minor festival in most towns, but in Flaxborough it remained a cherished, if faintly ridiculous, tradition. Children marched through the square in makeshift robes. A papier-mâché effigy of the saint was carried on the shoulders of scout leaders, and the choir, reduced in numbers but still functioning, sang before the war memorial. The whole town turned out for it, if only for the gingerbread sold from stalls afterward. Purbright had debated forbidding the event, fearing further theatrics, but he knew the conductor would prefer an audience, and a large one. Cancelling the pageant would simply force the hand sooner, perhaps in a more dangerous setting. Better to let it unfold under watchful eyes. As the choir sang, their notes trembling without Cribb's iron discipline, Purbright observed the crowd. Frayne was present, seated stiffly on a folding chair, face like carved stone. Clarissa Harbottle floated nearby in a fur-trimmed coat, her lips moving not with the hymn but with whispered commentary to anyone within reach. Beecham, though visibly shaken, had insisted on taking part, perhaps in penance, perhaps in fear. It was during the second hymn that the disruption came. From the balcony of the town hall overlooking the square, a long strip of cloth unfurled. White canvas, black letters, stark against the evening sky. two remain. Look to those who signed, not those who sang. The crowd gasped. Children pointed. Mothers shielded their eyes as though words could corrupt. The banner flapped once, then hung still. No one knew who had dropped it. Love murmured, "That tears it, sir." Whoever's doing this, they were never after the choir at all. The choir was bait. Purbright's expression did not change. The choir was a chorus, but the principals remain elsewhere. He strode through the crowd toward Frayne, who sat unmoved. "Curious, isn't it?" Purbright said quietly. "How the words follow the paper trail, the signatures, yours included." Frayne turned his gaze, cold and unblinking. "If this is your attempt at intimidation, Inspector, you'll find me impervious. Any fool with a bedsheet can point fingers." Before Purbright could reply, a commotion broke out at the back of the square. A boy, no older than 12, was waving a sheaf of papers he claimed to have found behind the bandstand. Constables retrieved them quickly and brought them to Purbright. They were council minutes, authentic in every detail save one. They bore annotations in red ink naming individuals as silent accomplices. Next to Frayne's name, a circle. Next to Harbottle's, an asterisk. Next to Larcher's, a question mark. The crowd murmured dangerously as whispers turned into accusations. Harbottle's voice rose above them, shrill with fury. "This is libel, forgery. I'll have the lot of you in court." Purbright raised a hand to calm the crowd, but the damage was done. The conductor had chosen the perfect moment. A public gathering, sacred tradition, disrupted, and names dangled like bait for hungry speculation. Back at the station that night, Purbright studied the forged minutes. They were good. Too good. Whoever had prepared them knew the formatting, the exact language of council proceedings, but the annotations betrayed a theatrical hand, a taste for drama over precision. Love dropped into a chair, exhausted. "So now we've got 3 sets of papers, the vicar's confession, Cribb's hymn book note, and these forged minutes. It's like the whole parish archive's been weaponized." Purbright nodded slowly. "And each document points us closer, not to theft, but to performance. Someone is orchestrating a morality play in which guilt is the chorus and revelation is the climax." Love rubbed his temples. "But if the choir was bait, who's left? Frayne, Harbottle, Larch. That's 3. The note said 2 remain." "Which means," Purbright said quietly, "one has already spoken, voluntarily or otherwise." He laid the forged minutes beside the vicar's confession. Together they told a story, not of one theft, but of a pattern. Funds shuffled, names protected, silence purchased. And yet the vicar's words had lacked names. Someone else had filled them in. Someone determined that Flaxborough remember, even if it meant fabricating memory. Love asked, "Do you think Frayne's behind it himself? Stirring things to keep suspicion spread?" Purbright shook his head. "Frayne thrives on order. He would not invite chaos. No, our conductor is someone with less to lose. Someone who has lived under the shadow of those signatures, waiting for the moment to drag them into light." The bells from St. Botolph's tolled 10 as Purbright closed the file. The pageant had ended in uproar, but the real performance was only beginning. He looked at Love and spoke in that calm, measured way that often concealed the urgency beneath. "Tomorrow, Sergeant, we summon them all, Frayne, Harbottle, Larch. Let them sit in the same room with the vicar's words, the forged minutes, and the music of their own silence. And then, perhaps, the conductor will step out from the wings." More answers in Chapter 7. But first, what's your theory? Who is staging these revelations? An insider betrayed, or an outsider with access to the archives? And when Purbright gathers them together, will the truth emerge, or another performance unfold? Comment below. The town hall's committee room had seen its share of tedious debates. lamp-post heights, refuse collection, and whether the town fair should allow beer stalls within sight of the churchyard. But on Saturday afternoon, under Purbright's instruction, it became something else entirely. A tribunal of sorts, a stage where silence would be tested and masks measured. Maurice Frayne arrived first, his overcoat immaculate, his cane tapping with rehearsed gravitas. He greeted no one, merely seated himself at the head of the table as though resuming a long-lost throne. Clarissa Harbottle swept in soon after, hat plume bobbing, lips pursed into a permanent accusation. Julian Larch, thinner than usual and twitching with unease, shuffled behind her, his hands never still. Mr. Beecham was there too, though he kept his head lowered, as though regretting every word of his ill-timed confession. Purbright entered last, with Sergeant Love, placing 3 piles on the table. First, the vicar's typed confession. Second, the forged minutes in red ink. Third, the slip found in Cribb's hymn book. He set them down deliberately, one after the other, like cards in a game where the rules had yet to be explained. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began softly, "we are not here to debate morality plays, nor to relitigate decisions made 2 decades past. We are here because these documents have been circulated, each bearing fragments of truth and fragments of invention. Someone has been composing history, and as you sit here now, the town outside has already begun singing the tune." Frayne snorted. "Inspector, if you expect me to indulge in theatrics, you've already been cast," Purbright said calmly. "Whether you wish it or not, your name is inked here, circled in red. Mrs. Harbottle, yours marked with an asterisk. Mr. Larch with a question mark, and poor Lionel Cribb silenced entirely. These papers are not idle mischief, they are a performance with purpose." Harbottle leaned forward, her voice sharp as cutlery. "And you expect us to believe Charles Stillingfleet orchestrated this farce from the grave? The man had many flaws, but melodrama was not one." Purbright slid the vicar's statement across the table. He left this willingly. A key in the font, a drawer unlocked, that was no accident. But the added notes, the forgeries, the staged exposures, that is someone else's hand. Larch's fingers trembled against the table. "Why us? Why drag this up now? The town has moved on. I've moved on. Haven't we suffered enough?" Purbright regarded him steadily. "Suffering in silence is not the same as being absolved, Mr. Larch. Someone knows what happened to the Brangwyn bequest. Someone knows who benefited. And someone is determined that legacy should not be hidden beneath stained glass and hymnals." Love interjected, notebook in hand. "What we need to establish is this. Who had access to these records? Who could obtain council minutes, ledger copies, and mortgage information? These were not public until now." Frayne's cane tapped against the floor. "Then your culprit is obvious, an insider, a clerk, someone who made a hobby of rummaging through files. Or," Purbright said quietly, "a victim of what those files concealed." The words hung. For a moment, even Harbottle's retort failed to rise. From the corner, Beecham lifted his head. "I told you, it was me. My son's debts. I took the money. Lionel helped me cover it. That's the truth." Purbright's gaze sharpened. "Is it? Or is it the truth someone slipped into your hymn book?" Beecham faltered, color draining from his face. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and then buried his head in his hands. Purbright let the silence stretch before he spoke again. "Whoever placed that note in your book, Mr. Beecham, also placed the message at the pageant. They are controlling the narrative. You are not a confessor. You are a mouthpiece." Harbottle bristled. "So what then, Inspector? You propose we all sit here like guilty children while some phantom conductor writes the score?" "No," Purbright said softly. "I propose you begin remembering, because the conductor is not a phantom. They are someone who has lived among you, watching, and their performance is nearly at its end." Larch gave a strangled laugh. Do you mean to frighten us, Inspector? Because it's working. Love scribbled a final note, then asked, Sir, what about the phrase in the hymn book? 3 have carried silence. 1 has broken. 2 remain. What if it's not about choir members at all, but about this very table? Purbright's eyes lingered on each face. That possibility has crossed my mind. The meeting broke reluctantly, each figure leaving with the weight of suspicions thicker than when they had arrived. Harbottle departed in a flurry of perfume and indignation, Frayne with his stiff dignity, Larch darting glances over his shoulder, and Beecham escorted gently by a constable. When the hall was empty, Love asked, Did we learn anything, sir? Yes, Purbright said, staring at the empty chairs. That fear has returned, and fear, Sergeant, is the clearest trail one can follow. As they stepped into the evening, a boy came running from the churchyard, waving another envelope. He had been delivering leaflets when he found it tucked under the memorial wreath. Purbright opened it beneath the street lamp's glow. Inside was a single line, typewritten as before. When the bells toll for the living, the truth will be sung. Love whispered. Another performance. Purbright folded the paper. Number the final rehearsal. More answers in Chapter 8. But first, what's your theory? Whose silence is about to break, and what truth lies waiting in the belfry's toll? Is the conductor inside the council chamber, or much closer to the vicar's own circle? Comment below. The following morning broke clear and sharp, the kind of day where even Flaxborough's crooked chimneys looked freshly etched against the sky. Purbright stood beneath St. Botolph's tower, gazing upward at the stone belfry. The bells were silent for now, but the message from the night before had given them a new weight. When the bells toll for the living, the truth will be sung. It was less a clue than a summons. Love joined, him, shivering slightly, though the air was mild. Do you really think the next act will be played up there? Purbright's gaze lingered on the tower's narrow slits. It was written plainly enough, and I've found that when a conductor wishes to be theatrical, one should expect the stage to be high, the audience low, and the echoes memorable. They climbed the winding stairwell, the stone steps worn into shallow curves by centuries of vergers and bell ringers. Dust clung to the walls, disturbed only by faint draughts and the occasional feather from a nesting pigeon. Near the top, the wooden chamber opened, vast and resonant, the bells looming like great bronze witnesses. On the floor beneath the largest bell lay a folder, weighed down by a hymn book. No lock, no seal, no attempt at concealment, merely placed, waiting. Purbright lifted the folder. Inside were photographs, blurred black and white images of council members in 2001, taken during a late-night meeting in the vestry. One showed Frayne with a sheaf of papers, another Harbottle speaking sharply to the vicar, and in the corner of one frame, Larch looking pale and uncomfortable. There were also copies of cheques bearing the Brangwyn estate's signature and records of withdrawals from an account that should not have existed. Love whistled softly. So it was true, a slush fund. Hidden in plain sight. Not hidden, Purbright said quietly. Archived. Whoever took these wanted them preserved, ready to be brought out at the right moment. As if on cue, the bells overhead stirred. A rope twitched, not by accident. Someone was up here with them. Love spun, but Purbright raised a hand. Show yourself. From behind a beam stepped a figure. Mr. Ellerby, the former sexton, older now, his hair gone silver but his frame still wiry. His eyes gleamed with something between relief and defiance. I thought you'd come, he said. You've found enough to know, haven't you? That none of them, Frayne, Harbottle, Larch, were innocent. Purbright regarded him calmly. It was you placing the notes, the hymn book, the banner, the false confession. Ellerby nodded once. I kept the records when they thought they'd destroyed them. The vicar, He begged me not to, but I couldn't let it vanish. I watched them steal from a dead woman's bequest, watched them bully him into silence. And then, when he grew too old to fight back, I decided it was time the town remembered. Love's voice was sharp. So you staged a circus. People are dead, Ellaby. Crib, that wasn't me, Ellaby snapped, his voice cracked with raw conviction. I never touched him. He was guilty, but his death was his own. Heart too weak, maybe. Fear too strong, but not me. I wanted words, not corpses. Purbright studied him. Then why the manipulation? The notes, the pressure on Beecham to confess to something he didn't do? Because they wouldn't listen otherwise, Ellaby said fiercely. If you come with quiet truth, they laugh. If you come with theatre, they gasp. And I wanted them to gasp. I wanted them to see what they'd hidden. He stepped closer, eyes bright. The vicar regretted his silence, Inspector. He told me, more than once, that it gnawed at him, but he couldn't name names, not while he was alive. So I did it for him. Love shook his head, by turning the whole town into an audience. Ellaby's voice softened. Yes, because guilt without witnesses is just memory. But guilt in the open, that's justice. Purbright closed the folder and placed it under his arm. And yet, Mr. Ellaby, the performance isn't finished. You've conducted, yes, but you've also left gaps, contradictions, enough to suggest that someone else has been writing in the margins. These forgeries. He held up the red-inked minutes. Don't bare your hand. They're more polished, more deliberate. For the first time, Ellaby faltered. I didn't write those. Love frowned. Then who did? Before Ellaby could reply, the bells rang suddenly, a single toll that shuddered through the chamber. The rope swung, pulled from below. Voices echoed faintly from the nave. Parishioners arriving for a midday service. Ellaby's face blanched. They'll know I'm here. They'll think I'm mad. Purbright's tone was steady. They'll know you wanted truth remembered. That's all. But inside, he knew the conductor's mask had slipped only partly. Ellaby had played his part, yes, but someone else had guided his hand, polishing his rough exposures into perfect theatre. As they escorted him down the stairs, Ellaby muttered under his breath. Two remain. I never wrote that line. That was someone else. Someone who wanted blood. In the nave, the bells still quivered from the toll, and the townsfolk looked upward, whispering. Purbright felt the weight of the folder under his arm and the unfinished cadence of a song not yet resolved. Sergeant, he said quietly, we have our archivist. But the conductor is still in the wings. More answers in Chapter 9. But first, what's your theory? Was Ellaby truly the hand behind the exposures, or merely the instrument of someone more ruthless? And who wrote the line about the two remaining? Comment below. Back at the station, Ellaby sat in the interview room with the calmness of a man who believed he had already unburdened himself. He admitted to placing the notes, to staging the discoveries, to keeping the photographs and ledgers all these years. But when Purbright pressed him about the most damning pieces, the hymn book slip, the red ink annotations, the phrase about two remaining, his certainty faltered. I didn't write those, Ellaby said again, shaking his head slowly. I wanted the truth remembered, yes, but I wanted it remembered clean. The vicar hated lies. He would never have condoned forgeries. I thought if the town could see the photographs, the ledgers, they'd understand. But those notes, they're someone else's play. Purbright studied him with quiet intensity. And yet, they reached the same targets you were aiming for, the same names. That's not accident. That's collaboration, or someone close enough to anticipate your steps. Ellaby looked down at his hands. I worked alone. I swear it. Love leaned in. Then who else knew about the documents? Did you ever show them to anyone before now? There was a pause. Then reluctantly, only one. Years ago, when I thought I might lose them. I gave a copy to Clarissa Harbottle. She was on the finance board. I thought she'd want the truth safe. Love's eyebrows shot up. Harbottle? You gave them to Harbottle? She promised she'd hold them confidential. Said it was better to wait, that one day it would all matter again. I believed her. When Ellerby was taken back to his cell, Love muttered, "So she's been sitting on this all along, polishing it, waiting for her chance." Purbright folded the confession back into its folder. Or using it. The typewriter notes. The forged minutes. Those bear the hand of someone trained, methodical. Harbottle was a solicitor once. She knew how to make papers look convincing. She had access to clerical styles, to stamps, to formats. Love frowned. But why point the finger at herself with that asterisk in red ink? Why not keep her name clear? Purbright's gaze was thoughtful. Because nothing shields better than inclusion. A guilty party who lists their own name among others appears less guilty, not more. It dilutes suspicion, makes her seem just another victim of a prankster. That evening, Purbright summoned Harbottle under the guise of clarifying her old role in the council finances. She arrived, as always, with disdain as her armor. "Inspector, I must protest at being hounded. I have business of my own, you know. Charitable boards, correspondence, matters of actual importance." Purbright motioned her into the chair opposite. He laid down the forged minutes. "Your asterisk, Mrs. Harbottle. Quite neat. Almost like a solicitor's marginalia." Her expression stiffened. "Preposterous. And yet Ellerby tells us you once held copies of the Brangwyn documents, long before these recent theatrics, long before the vicar's death." Her eyes flickered, just for an instant before hardening again. "I was entrusted, yes. He feared losing them. I told him I'd keep them safe." "And did you?" Purbright asked. "I returned them eventually." Purbright leaned forward slightly. "Or did you rewrite them, enhance them, turn dull records into explosive revelations?" Ellerby's methods were crude. Slips of paper, hidden hymn books. But these, he tapped the red ink, are a barrister's work, measured, convincing, the difference between gossip and scandal. Harbottle bristled. "Are you accusing me of murder now as well, Inspector?" "Because if Lionel Cribb dropped dead from a weak heart, that is hardly my crime." Purbright's voice was calm. "I am accusing you of authorship, not of the crime itself, but of the script." There was silence. Then Harbottle gave a sharp laugh, brittle as glass. "If I had written this farce, Inspector, don't you think I'd have cast myself better? As heroine, perhaps, or saviour, not asterisked villain." "On the contrary," Purbright said softly. "You wrote yourself into the chorus to make the audience believe you had no part in the solo." Harbottle's face flushed, then cooled. She leaned back. "You are clever, Inspector. Too clever by half. But you forget something. Truth, once released, cannot be claimed. Whether I wrote lines or not, the town already believes them. They believe Frayne stole, that Larch connived, that Cribb profited, and belief, my dear man, is stronger than evidence." When she left, Love muttered, "She as good as admitted it." "Not admitted," Purbright corrected, "but revealed her philosophy. To her, authorship is irrelevant once the play is performed. That makes her dangerous." Later that night, Purbright walked alone past the churchyard, the bells looming above in their tower. His thoughts turned not only to Harbottle, but to the words of the final note. When the bells toll for the living, the truth will be sung. Perhaps it was not about services or summons at all. Perhaps it was about voices still alive. Frayne, Harbottle, Larch. Perhaps one of them would soon be forced to sing, not in words, but in actions. The next morning brought confirmation. A constable arrived breathless at the station, clutching a telegram. It had been slipped under the rectory door, another typewritten note. "Tomorrow at the toll of noon, the conductor reveals the final name. Watch the tower." Love exhaled. "So it's coming to a head, sir." publicly. Purbright folded the telegram carefully. Yes, and this time, Sergeant, we must ensure it is not the town that hears first, but us. For once the bells toll, the conductor will want an audience. We must be ready to hear the truth before it is turned into theatre again. The bells outside struck 9, echoing across the square, each note a reminder that time, like performance, waits for no man. More answers in Chapter 10. But first, what's your theory? Did Harbottle sharpen Ellaby's rough truths into scandal? Or is someone else still writing in the margins? And when noon comes and the bells toll, whose name will be the last to echo across Flaxborough? Comment below. The square was crowded well before noon, word having spread as though by some invisible bell already ringing in every household. Shop shutters were half drawn, customers left waiting in grocers' aisles, all drawn to St. Botolph's Tower by the promise of revelation. In Flaxborough, nothing summoned quicker than the hint of scandal given a timetable. Inspector Purbright stood near the base of the tower with Sergeant Love, constables stationed discreetly among the throng. He did not care for theatre, but the conductor, whoever still pulled the strings, had chosen this moment deliberately. Noon would strike, and with it, some spectacle meant to crown their performance. Frine was there, stiff-backed in his coat, refusing to yield an inch of composure. Harbottle stood nearby, gloved hands clasped, her hat plumed defiant as a banner. Larch hovered at the edges, twitching, his face pale and damp with nerves. Each bore the look of someone about to hear a verdict they could not appeal. The bells struck once, 2:15. Then again, past. The crowd murmured, expectation building like a held breath. At 12:05, a constable hurried from the nave, a slip of paper in his hand. He passed it to Purbright. Another note, freshly delivered. When the 12th strikes, look to the south face. Love muttered. South face. The belfry wall? Purbright pocketed the slip. Keep your eyes up. The first toll of noon rolled out across the rooftops, deep and sonorous. At the second, pigeons wheeled away from the tower. By the 6th, the crowd was utterly silent. And then, at the 9th, a white sheet unfurled from the south face, fluttering in the sunlight. Black letters sprawled across it in neat typeface stenciling. The last kept silence is not in the council, it is in the pulpit. Gasps rippled through the square. The crowd turned not to Frayne or Harbottle, but toward the church itself. Love whispered, "The curate." Purbright's eyes narrowed. The curate, Reverend Peter Ashcroft, had been appointed only a year before, a quiet young man known more for his awkward sermons than for any grasp of finance. He was standing near the porch now, frozen, his mouth slightly open as parishioners stared at him in disbelief. Purbright moved quickly, intercepting him before the crowd's murmurs grew dangerous. "Reverend Ashcroft, come with me." They brought him inside the nave, the sound of the bells still pounding above. Ashcroft's hands trembled as he tried to protest. "I don't understand. Why are they looking at me? I wasn't even here in 2001. I was still at theological college." Purbright's voice was calm. "Then the conductor has chosen their final misdirection, but misdirection points as surely as truth if you follow its angle." On the altar lay a sealed envelope, placed there during the commotion. Purbright broke it open. Inside were 2 documents. One was a parish expenditure sheet from 2001, listing maintenance payments with Ashcroft's name clumsily inserted in type, though he could not have been there. The other was a letter, typewritten like the others. The vicar was not alone. His successor carries his silence. Ask what he knew of the drawer before the key was found. Ashcroft shook his head violently. "I knew nothing. I've never even opened that cabinet. I didn't have a key." Love studied him. "He looks terrified, sir. If he's an actor, he's no good at it." Purbright set the letter down, his gaze fixed on the neat, precise typeface. No, Sergeant, this isn't about him. It's about undermining faith in every pulpit that follows. If the vicar's legacy is tainted, then so too must be his successor. It completes the circle, from choir to council to clergy. They returned outside, where the crowd pressed for answers. Purbright raised his voice just enough to carry. The message points to the pulpit, but Reverend Ashcroft was not here in 2001. These papers are forgeries, meant to draw suspicion where it cannot rest. The truth lies not in new names, but in the old signatures already circled. The townsfolk murmured, uncertain, glancing between Frayne, Harbottle, and Larch. The three stood like figures caught in a spotlight, none daring to speak. As the 12th toll faded, Purbright noted the timing. Precisely on the last echo, a second sheet fluttered from the belfry. Smaller, almost overlooked, he motioned a constable to fetch it. This one bore only 5 words, stark against the page. "The conductor is among you," the crowd gasped again. Suspicion rippled like fire. Harbottle shouted above it, "Then search us all! Expose this mischief-maker once and for all." Frayne stood immobile, face like granite. Larch muttered something inaudible, sweat shining at his temples. Purbright turned to Love, voice low. "It ends soon. Whoever has orchestrated this cannot resist the final bow. And when they step forward, it will not be to confess. It will be to claim." Love asked, "Claim what, sir?" Purbright's eyes swept the restless crowd. The last word, the right to say they directed the whole performance, but before that curtain falls, we must be ready with the truth, untainted, undeniable, and theirs no longer. The bells above stilled, leaving only the uneasy silence of a town waiting for its conductor to show their face. More answers in Chapter 11. But first, what's your theory? Is the conductor hiding in plain sight among the council names? Or, closer still, among the very accusers? And when they step forward to claim their performance, will Purbright be ready to silence them with fact? Comment below. By nightfall, the square had emptied, but the air still held the residue of unrest. The banners, the accusations, the curate's frightened denial, all of it had left Flaxborough simmering like a pot left too long on the hob. Inspector Purbright sat in his office, the stack of papers before him. The vicar's confession, Ellerby's photographs, the forged minutes, the hymn book slip, the telegram promising revelation. Each was a fragment of truth spliced with invention, orchestrated with precision. Yet the conductor had not stepped into the light. Not yet. Love paced restlessly, pausing at the window to look at the lamplit square. "They'll be expecting something tomorrow, sir. More theatre. Another sheet dropped, another message pinned. The whole town's waiting as though for a final act." Purbright's tone was calm but firm. "Then we must give them one. But this time, on our stage, not theirs." The next morning, under Purbright's instruction, a notice was pinned to the church door, an open meeting in the parish hall that evening. The town was invited to hear the constabulary's findings on the vicar's legacy. It was bait, plain and deliberate, but the conductor would not be able to resist. To manipulate an audience was one thing. To have it gathered, expectant, ready, that was irresistible. By 7 o'clock, the hall was full. Every chair taken, people pressed at the doors, their voices hushed but tinged with anticipation. At the front sat Frayne, Harbottle, and Larch, unwillingly reunited under the weight of watchful eyes. Ellerby, guarded but present, sat to one side, his expression taut with anxiety. The curate, Ashcroft, sat pale and stiff, determined to endure the whispers. Purbright rose slowly, holding a sheaf of papers, his voice carried, calm and steady. For weeks now, this town has been fed fragments, some true, some false, all intended to provoke scandal. The vicar left a statement, yes, of a bequest misused, of silence regretted. But he left no names. Those came later, from another hand. A murmur swept through the crowd. Harbottle's chin lifted, her eyes flashing. Purbright continued. Mr. Ellerby preserved records that might otherwise have vanished. He believed truth should outlast convenience. But someone else took those records and sharpened them into weapons. Notes, forged minutes, banners. Someone who understood that drama, not documentation, would sway this town. Someone who wanted not merely truth, but power over how it was remembered. He laid down the forged minutes. The hand behind these was precise, legalistic, careful. Not Ellerby's. His were rough, urgent, imperfect. This was written by a solicitor's mind. A mind used to drafting, revising, concealing within clarity. A mind like Mrs. Harbottle's. Gasps. Harbottle rose at once, her voice high and sharp. Outrageous. I did nothing but safeguard what was entrusted to me. If papers were forged, it was not by me. Purbright's tone remained level. And yet, Mrs. Harbottle, the typewriter used for these notes was found in your office. The constables retrieved it this afternoon. She faltered. For the first time, her poise cracked. That proves nothing. Any number of hands left fingerprints, Purbright interjected softly. Yours alone. The room erupted, voices rising, some in disbelief, some in triumphant vindication. Frane's face darkened. Larch looked as though he might faint. Harbottle's hands gripped the table edge, white-knuckled as she hissed, So what if I wrote them? Does it matter who held the pen when the words are true? They stole. They bullied. They silenced. I merely gave shape to what everyone knew. Purbright's gaze was steady. But you did not stop at truth. You added. You invented. You accused the curate, who could not have been involved. You placed asterisks and question marks as though arranging footnotes in a play. You turned records into theatre, not for justice, but for control. That is why you are the conductor. And that is why your legacy will be one of manipulation, not revelation. Harbottle sank slowly back into her chair, her voice lower now, bitter. I did what the vicar never could. He left whispers. I gave them words. The hall buzzed, restless. Purbright raised a hand. What matters is this. The Brangwyn bequest was stolen. That is fact. The ledgers prove it. Who benefited? The mortgage records show Lionel Cribb's debt cleared with uncanny timing. Councillor Frayne oversaw the account's closure. Mr. Larch signed authorizations without question. Each carried silence. And when regret finally stirred, the vicar left a key, hoping someone would unlock the truth. That much we now have. He paused, allowing the weight of it to settle. But spectacle is not justice, and Flaxborough must choose which it prefers. There was silence, heavy and long. Then, from the back, a voice. Justice. Others echoed it. Soon the hall hummed with the word, repeated in low tones as though rehearsing a new hymn. Purbright gathered the papers, his voice soft but clear. Then let justice, not theatre, be our vicar's legacy. Later, as the hall emptied, Love murmured, Do you think they'll ever see her as guilty, sir? Or just as the one who gave them the show? Purbright looked at the quiet street outside, the lamps glowing against the dusk. She will always have her defenders. That is the way of dramatists. But truth, Sergeant, truth is less spectacular, yet it lingers longer, and that is enough. The bells tolled once more from St. Botolph's tower, this time for evening prayer. No banners unfurled, no slips appeared, no gasps from a crowd. Only the deep, honest sound of bronze, tolling for the living and the dead alike. The performance was over. The curtain had fallen,